Coming up on Maine Challenge, political observer Willy Ritch. Hello, and welcome to Maine Challenge, a production of Lincoln County Indivisible and Lincoln County Television. Our guest this week is Willy Ritch, a longtime political observer, has been a radio talk show host, and currently chair of the 16 Counties Coalition, and a lifelong Mainer and my longtime friend. Willy Ritch, welcome.
Great to see you, Chuck. Thanks for having me on the program.
It's good to have you here. Let's get right to it. You're putting a lot of your energy these days into the Susan Collins U.S. Senate re-election campaign, not for Susan Collins, but against her. Am I right?
Sure. I mean, I think I'd put a slightly finer point on it. We started the 16 Counties Coalition over a year ago, and it's been basically an accountability campaign. We're a nonprofit, and we've been for over a year asking Susan Collins to do the right thing and bringing attention to some of the decisions she's made, some of the positions she's taken, some of the votes that she's taken on things like the Republican tax bill, which is really just a giveaway to big corporations and the wealthy, and also highlighting the fact that she's taken just so much money now from corporate PACs and corporate donors. So that's been our job, is to sort of give voice to people around these issues. And we spent a fair amount of time, particularly before the pandemic struck, in trying to get her to actually come out and listen to Mainers. As I think everybody watching probably knows, she hasn't held a public town hall in, I don't know, something like 20 years. And we thought, well, maybe it's too much work to put one on. So we did it for her. We staged town halls in Bangor, Bar Harbor, Portland. We had hundreds and hundreds of people show up on cold winter nights in Portland, for example. And we invited her and we said, look, you can come and, anybody can ask any question that they want. This isn't going to be scripted. We'll make this a real public forum. And, she declined each time. So I think our job has been a couple of things: to highlight these issues, to highlight the decisions she's made, to highlight where she's getting all this campaign money. And also, though, to try and plead with her to start listening to real Mainers and not these corporate supporters that she has.
And that's a problem that goes beyond Susan Collins, but it's very much coming to a head here in Maine in this campaign. I had Shenna Bellows was my guest a few weeks ago, and Shenna, as you remember, ran against Susan Collins 6 years ago. And I asked Shenna if the Susan Collins running this year was the same Susan Collins that she ran against. And I guess I'd ask you a similar question. Has Susan Collins fundamentally changed?
Well, I think that question, has she changed or has the electorate changed in some way, is a little bit of it's sort of a little bit of a Rorschach test, and I think it depends on your perspective on Susan Collins. My perspective is there's some of both. There certainly was a time where she was much more willing to go against her party, didn't feel this sort of blind loyalty to the Republican Party on key issues. And I want to just sort of take a little bit of a tangent there. Don't be mistaken on the important issues, on the votes in which her vote really counts. She is there with Mitch McConnell, with the Republicans, and with the president 100% of the time. And she loves to, argue about statistics, how many times she voted against the president. But she's always there for us when it doesn't really matter. It seems to be her approach to going against the president. So I think that, she has sort of shifted, and I think the times have shifted too. I mean, if you think about the kind of things that Senator Collins likes to talk about, she had a TV ad earlier, I think, about how she's the co-chair of the bipartisan Senate Tick-Borne Illness Caucus. And in a world in which we have a president who's dismantling our democracy piece by piece, and we have an economy that's crumbling, we have a pandemic, we have a global climate crisis, we have some of the worst inequalities in our society that we've ever had. For her to, sure, I mean, I don't want to get Lyme's disease either, but I mean, for her to continue to sort of operate in that kind of world of appropriations and local politics, I think it seems a little out of place. So my answer to you is I think both, but my answer is also, in a way, it doesn't really matter what the answer to the question is. Whichever it is, whichever you think it is, she's changed or the electorate has changed. She is increasingly out of step with a growing number of Mainers. She's just not focusing on the issues that they care about, and she's just not taking the kind of stands that they think that she needs to.
Has she, I remember very clearly in either her first run or her first re-election run, she pledged to only serve 2 terms.
Right.
And I've seen the videotape. I think it was shot at Bates College at the hall there, the Olin Arts Center. And she says very clearly and unequivocally that she would not serve more than 2 terms. Has she ever responded to that and explained why she is now running for her 5th term?
She has, and she's used the same sort of part of one of her central arguments that she makes about why we should have her as our senator, and that is that seniority matters. And she said when she ran for the Senate, she didn't know that seniority mattered, and then she got there and she found out that it did. And so she felt like it was important to continue to hold that office. And she talks a lot about that. Right? She talks a lot about how senior she is. She talks a lot about what number she is in the Republican caucus or on the Appropriations Committee. But I think that we all sort of scratch our heads and say, well, then how come when you express disappointment, when you express regret at the president's actions, when you express concern about what the Republicans or Mitch McConnell are doing, well, if you got so much power, if you've got so much influence, and if you've been there for 24 years or however longer it's been, can't you do something more than just sort of wring your hands on the sidelines?
And also one could point out that when she said she didn't know what seniority meant in the Senate, she'd been on Senator Cohen's staff for several years.
A fair point. Yeah.
That's a little presumptuous too. I find myself wearing out the mute button on my television, and I mute a lot of ads, but almost all the political ads. And if it's I'm Susan Collins and I approve this message, that's the quickest mute. But I'm still offended by some of the advertising on both sides, but it's much worse, in my opinion, on Susan Collins' side, especially that of the 1820 PAC. I don't know who that is. I keep thinking maybe I should go Google it and look it up and figure out who it is. They seem to be spending a whole lot of money, and if ever there was an example of false and deceptive advertising, I would certainly point to the 1820 PAC. Any thoughts on that?
Wow. Where do I start? It is, and I sort of mean it too, because, political fundraising and political financing can get kind of complicated and murky, and I understand that. The 1820 PAC is a federal super PAC, and that means that people can give as much money as they want to it, and they can spend as much money as they want to it. Just before we went on this morning, I checked, they've spent just over $6 million in TV ads supporting Senator Collins here in Maine. One of the biggest contributors is a guy named Steve Schwartzman, who runs the Blackstone Group, the biggest private equity firm in America. Schwartzman's net worth during the pandemic has increased by 27%.
Wow.
And in large part, he's much, much richer than he's ever been, in large part because of the tax bill that Susan Collins was the deciding vote on. So he's put, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but $500,000 or more into the 1820 PAC. And it is a drop in the bucket to how well he has prospered during both the pandemic and in the aftermath of that tax vote. So he's he's one of the biggest donors. Right now it's run by a guy named Scott Reed, who used to work for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I just noticed a couple of days ago that Scott Reed, who runs the 1820 PAC, has just restarted his company Chesapeake Enterprises. Chesapeake Enterprises is a firm that he had with Tom Daffron, Susan Collins' husband. So they used to be in business together. And then there are some other. This is not all about Collins' husband and the guy from the Chamber of Commerce and the guy from the Blackstone Group. There's other people that have contributed. And one in particular, just as we were taping this, and I know this is going to air, in a week or so. So this story will have developed, but what we're really just learning as we went on the air is that one of the contributors to the 1820 Super PAC was an organization in Hawaii called the Society of Young Women Engineers. And that was apparently started by a guy named Martin Cow and his wife. Earlier this year or last year, Senator Collins bragged about how she helped Martin Cow get an $8 million Department of Defense contract. He's got an office here in Portland. Yesterday, he was arrested by federal authorities and charged with $13 million in PPP fraud. So the 1820 PAC not only has the private equity guy and the guy who used to be in business with her husband, but it's also now got $150,000 that was funneled through this secretive organization started by the wife of a guy who this morning is sitting in jail because the federal authorities say he's illicitly got $13 million from the Paycheck Protection Program. So tangled web for sure.
And the long-term damage is to the truth. Because they have absolutely, you can see it when you look at their advertising and some of the facts. They have absolutely no concern about getting their facts correct or the implications and the outcomes of the results of their false information and deceptive advertising. And I'm personally offended by it, and that's the end of my speech for the day.
I doubt that, but
on TV anyway.
Okay.
Was Kavanaugh a tipping point for voters who are now fed up with Susan Collins but always voted for her before? Was that the tipping point?
So, Chuck, in the last 16 months or so, I've talked to people all over the state about this, and I think certainly for some, Kavanaugh was absolutely the tipping point. There was an interesting article in Politico a little while ago, just in the last week or so, and Les Fossil from Alna, a former state lifelong Republican. Did you ever serve with him?
Oh yeah, I served with him. We co-chaired the moderate caucus, which was a misnomer of sorts.
Well, he was the Lincoln County chair for the Collins reelection campaign last time around. And he has absolutely had it with Senator Collins. And in this article, he said that for him, Kavanaugh was the tipping point. But then he went on to describe other opportunities for her to stand up and do the right thing in which she hasn't done it. And I think in a way, Les Fossil's sort of answer to the question is what I've heard around the state. A lot of people, Kavanaugh really was the issue, but for a lot of people, Kavanaugh also represented something. It represented Collins giving that 45-minute speech when she said she was going to vote for him, in which she made all kinds of excuses, but then, did the thing that we didn't want her to do. Kavanaugh and that whole process where she, listened, where people came from Maine, traveled to Washington, went into her office and told deeply personal stories of pain and trauma about their own experiences. And then after listening to that speech, those people who had made that incredible self-sacrifice just realized that she had probably made up her mind and was always going to vote that way. And so I think for Kavanaugh is when a lot of people said, she talks this game about being deliberative, but really, when Mitch McConnell needs her vote, when the president needs her vote, she's always going to be there. I also, as I listen to people talk, sometimes people who voted for her, most people in the state have voted for her at least once. When people who voted for her before, I'll listen to them talk about their view of Senator Collins now. And it's almost like they're looking for a reason. They know that they don't like her anymore. They know that they don't believe she represents them anymore, but they're kind of searching for, like, how do I describe that? What is the label that I put on it? And for some people, Kavanaugh is an easy label to put on that. But I do think people's disappointment with Senator Collins, to use one of her favorite words, runs deeper than that.
One of the things that has distressed me about Democrats this session, this cycle, is that nobody seems to be asking Republicans up and down the ticket to say out loud whether they stand with the Trump agenda or where they diverge from it. Mm-hmm. And the Democrats aren't holding them to account for this, and they're certainly not going to volunteer because they know the danger involved. But I'd sure like to know how some of these candidates, including Senator Collins, feels about the kids in cages. Is that really a program that's making us safer? Right. Destroying Social Security, destroying the post office. Are these things that are good for America and that these candidates support? Or would they repudiate the president and his agenda and Senator Collins? I mean, I really do want to hear the answers from Republicans about those questions, but they don't get asked or answered as far as I can tell. Any thoughts on that?
I think a lot of us have a question or several questions that we really want to ask Senator Collins. And I agree with you, Chuck. I mean, in 2016, for her to write an op-ed in the Washington Post saying that President Trump is not fit for office, I want to ask her, so what has happened since 2016 to make you arrive at the position where you're not really sure, like where you don't feel like you can say out loud? Was it the kids in the cages? Was it the dismantling of the post office? Was it his handling of the pandemic? Was it his deeply offensive personal attacks on your dear friend John McCain? Which one of these things moved you from he's not fit for president to I'd rather not say?
Boy, I would love to hear her answer that. Maybe somebody will see it and suggest that she address that. And by the way, anybody on Senator Collins' staff who's watching this, Senator Collins is invited to join us. Please contact Lincoln County Indivisible and we will make it happen, because we're not sitting here just taking shots. We'd really like to hear some answers. Another diversion off the path. Any thoughts on how Maine is going to vote on the Collins election and Trump and other up and down the ticket races? Any thoughts on that? Are you seeing any information that you can share?
Well, look, I mean, I packed away my crystal ball a long time ago, and I'm not sure where it is. I think it's probably with that old tube TV that I have down in the basement somewhere. So I don't have the advantage of that. And, I think after 2016, a lot of people are, we're a little reluctant to say, I'm sure this is the way things are going to turn out. But I guess just to sort of step, out of my role as the executive director of the 16 Counties Coalition, and just as somebody who, like you, Chuck, has watched politics for a long time, I'll say a couple of things. One is about the presidential election. When you actually look at the numbers around the country, including those important electoral swing states, Joe Biden's further ahead than Hillary Clinton was. But what's much more important than that is that I think that for as unstable as a world as it feels to most of us, it's actually pretty stable when it comes to politics and to the presidential election. Trump is not anywhere near as unknown as he was. Remember last time the Trump supporters, the Drain the Swamp crowd, the Make America Great Again crowd, they knew who Trump was and they loved him. There was a big chunk of independents and kind of casual voters who didn't really know who he was and wanted to just give him a chance. And Hillary Clinton also was, a polarizing candidate. So what's different this time is that the Trump loyalists, they're still there. They're 38% of the electorate. But those swing voters, they know who Trump is now, and they're, and they've judged him. And then Joe Biden is not nearly as polarizing a candidate. I was talking to some folks that I work with who do some research, not necessarily just political research, but they're from the consumer data world. You know how the consumer databases know, it's scary what they know about us, Chuck. They know not only your age and your gender and where you live, but also your cell phone number, whether or not you're going to buy a car in the next year, and if you like cats. And these data research firms that I talk to also track politics. And I was talking to one just the other day, and they said to me, we saw the switch about 10 days before the 2016 election. We saw the flip in the Midwest. We knew that Trump was going to win, not 2 weeks before the election, because he wasn't going to, but a week before the election, we knew he was, because we saw it. What we're seeing now, they said to me, is that if the election were held today, Biden would win in even bigger numbers than the polls show. That could change, but again, I think it's less dynamic, or it's a little more baked in. And then as far as Senator Collins goes, there's this expression in political polling: the trend is your friend. The trend has not been Senator Collins' friend. If you look at what's happened over the last year, I think it's a very, very close race. Frankly, I think it's closer than a lot of the public polls show. But I would much rather be Sarah Gideon than Susan Collins in this race. Like the president, we're taping this just a couple of days after that horrific first presidential debate. But the president needed to do something to convince a bunch of sort of swing voters that they should leave Biden and go to him, and he did nothing to do that. Same deal, I think, with Susan Collins. She's got to find a way to convince these sort of middle voters to leave Sarah Gideon and go to her side, and she's just not doing it. It's not happening.
I wish I had been there for the conversation in which somebody went up to Collins and said, we got you a dog, you need to run with the dog.
So I have not seen that commercial, but people have told me about it. Can you describe it to me?
Well, it's a standard commercial, and I suspect this little clip goes into whatever, but it's supposed to make her look energetic and youthful and exciting, but she looks very uncomfortable. I would be shocked if I learned that was really her dog. And she's not really running. She's just sort of trotting with the dog and smiling. And, it's supposed to be a good feeling, but and of course, I bring a bit of a negative touch to the look. Maybe it really works, but are there undecided voters?
There are a few.
Numbers. I mean, are there numbers of undecided voters?
Yeah, I haven't looked at that number in polling recently, but there's a cohort of voters who are, still on the fence. But I think more importantly, there are ones that are soft supporters of either candidate, and therefore they could switch. The support for Senator Collins is particularly soft, though. Pollsters use terms like, are you likely to vote for so and so? Are you very likely to vote for so and so? Are you certain to vote for so and so? Do you approve? Do you approve strongly? They use these shades, and so when you look at Senator Collins' overall numbers, either on who's going to vote for or what her approval ratings are, compared to Sarah Gideon's, the totals are close, but that soft support versus solid support is much higher for Collins. That's to say, more of her supporters are soft supporters, and maybe a little willing to switch.
I'm sure you could find out how anybody is going to vote by showing them the clip of Sue Collins running with her puppy and just asking them whether they like it or not. And those who like it are going to be voting for her, and those who don't. I mean, that's the way the electorate is up and down. Are there going to be more ticket splitters than there were in 2016? Any idea?
Well, I think in the it's a good question. It's an important question. I think in terms of the Senate race, which of course was Collins was last up in 2014, there'll be far fewer ticket splitters. In other words, there's going to be, there aren't going to be as many people that are going to vote for Biden and Collins, and nobody's going to vote for Trump and Gideon. I just don't see. I'd like to meet that voter who thinks that's the right choice to make. But you asked compared to 2016, and I bet you there will be, fewer ticket splitters in the sense that, particularly in the Senate race, I think that Republicans have, to a certain extent, rallied around Susan Collins, around Senator Collins, and those Democrats who felt like they could vote for her in the past just don't feel like they can do it again.
Well, Willie, I know we could keep going for another half hour or hour. We're basically running out of we've run out of time. It's coming to the close. First of all, I want to thank you for being agreeable to coming on the show. But I really enjoy always talking to you, whether in public on TV or in private. But do you think there's going to be a strong turnout?
I do. I think there's going to be a very strong turnout, both in early voting and at the polls. But I think, since we're near the end, I think it's a good segue for something I did want to say, which is I'm just so impressed that the Lincoln County Indivisible is doing this program. And I think that the work that Indivisible groups and others like them around the state and around the country are doing is very, very impressive. I've worked in politics, in and around politics for a long time, as you have, Chuck, and I know you've served in public office. And the work that we do is we probably like to think important, but I think it really pales in comparison to what groups like Indivisible do. While the president tries to dismantle democracy, groups like this are practicing it in exactly the way that it was intended to be. So I think that's going to drive turnout, and I think it's just it's one of the things that gives me hope for the future of this country.
Well, thank you very much. Willy Ritch, our guest today on Maine Challenge, part of Lincoln County Indivisible and presented by Lincoln County TV. Thank you again, Willy, for your thoughts and for being on the show, and we'll see you real soon.
Great to see you, Chuck. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Show your support for Maine Challenge and LCTV's programming. We're all about community. Please go to lctv.org to make a contribution. Your support makes us stronger together.